right.
All right.
I can see that we're live.
And we're live. All right. So, yeah, welcome everybody to our Thursday night live stream. And by everybody, I mean the people that are watching it after the fact, because I think probably nobody's tuned in right now. But yeah, I feel like we're competing against Thursday night football now. So hopefully you're choosing us over your Rams Bills lineup, even though I have to say I do have Josh Allen on my fantasy team. So I'm very interested in how the Bills do tonight. I also have Stephon Diggs as well. So I'm all Bills tonight, but you know, anyway.
Are you a Buffalo Bills fan?
Am I?
Yeah.
No, I have no stake other than they're on my fantasy team.
Okay.
I don't dislike the Bills. I'm a Lions fan, but that's, pathetic, really. It's only because I grew up watching the Lions and all of that. But tonight we're here to talk about replacement band members. And what do we mean by replacement band members? So basically, you had the original lineup of a band, and either a member died, like in the case of Bon Scott, or they just left the band. And you had a replacement member that came in that either entirely changed the fortunes of a band, or helped the band stay relevant, or maybe just added a new element to a band. Like the one that immediately comes to mind for me would be, you had in 1969 Brian Jones was kicked out of the Rolling Stones, and they brought Mick Taylor in, and that ushered in a completely new era for the Rolling Stones, where they became, the greatest rock and roll band in the world, as they kind of glossed themselves. But, that's kind of what I'm talking about is, with Brian Jones, they never would have made an album like Sticky Fingers. They never would have made an album like Exile on Main Street. That just wouldn't have happened. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, but we can also talk about, replacement band members that maybe were a downgrade for a band, like maybe Gary Cherone with Van Halen. Like, Gary Cherone, great singer, love his work with Extreme, but unfortunately, many Van Halen fans regard Van Halen 3 as the worst Van Halen album, and it just turned out to not be a great fit. So that's kind of what we're here to talk about. I don't know if we have anybody jumping in right now. I'm just kind of rambling because that's what I like to do.
Well, Jeff, while we're waiting and wait for a couple of people to join, I know right before we talked about the Beatles box set, and that seems to be the biggest news in the vinyl community and probably in music in general. What is the most exciting aspect of the Revolver box set that you're looking forward to?
For me, and I know not everybody feels this way, but I'm a big alternate take and demo guy. And so, like, I'm looking forward to the remix, absolutely. But for me, I love seeing how a song develops. Like one of the joys of the anthology project for me was hearing, like, Tomorrow Never Knows, that take one, which sounded so different from the finished product. And you're like, how did they get from here to there? Or even Got to Get You Into My Life. If you heard that early take on Anthology 2, it was like, wow, like they started here and they got here. Or Strawberry Fields Forever, those early takes, or those John Lennon demos where you're hearing them and it's like, wow, I've been so used to the finished product for all these years. I had no idea that the demo sounded like that, and that there was such an evolution just for one song, where you started off with just a really stripped down basic demo, and then gradually, even take one of that song sounds radically different from the final mix that they use. So that for me has always been the joy. And Josh, we were talking yesterday, you had read that Rolling Stone article about how the Yellow Submarine demo sounds like it's one of those instances where the demo is a radical arrangement from what we heard, on the eventual Revolver album. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to that. I'm not so much looking forward to the mono, having that, because like I said before, I've already got the 2014 mono box set. So that's not really a selling point for me. It's always going to be, hearing those songs and how they came to be. There, some of them we got on the anthology. So I know they're not going to, at least I hope they're not going to replicate any of the songs that we already heard on anthology. Hopefully we'll get some different takes, we'll get some demos and things that have never been heard before. And the thing about the Beatles with their demos and their alternate takes, everything in the vault is available on the internet. You can find it somewhere, and so when they dig deeper and they pull out stuff that nobody's ever heard before, one of the things that I wish they had included, there's a track is called Carnival of Light, and it is the grail of lost Beatle outtakes, and it's a experimental song that John and Paul put together for some sort of, I forget what I don't remember exactly what it was. It was some kind of festival or film festival or something, and they were commissioned to put together a soundtrack. And the track is called Carnival of Life, and it's very experimental. It probably sounds a lot like early Pink Floyd, but it has never been released. And George Harrison, Paul wanted to put it on the anthology, those albums, and George Harrison said, no, it's too far out there. I don't want it on there. And so George vetoed it. And now that George has passed away, I think this would have been a great opportunity to unearth that and get Beatle fans, ask any Beatle fans what their most coveted outtake would be. And I guarantee you 85% of them would say the Carnival of Light song. And that was recorded between Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. So this would have been a great opportunity to roll that one out. I feel like this is kind of a lost opportunity to do that. But nonetheless, I'm excited, for the remix #1, and then #2 for all the alternate takes, the demos, and things like that.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting because they're going to have the Beatles song Rain on there, which they apparently, when they recorded it like a Ramones song that's very fast. And then they slowed the tape down for what we've heard all these years. So it'll be interesting to hear that song played at normal speed.
Yeah, that's why it's got that dreamlike quality to it, because you're right. They recorded it faster than what you hear on the record, and they slowed it down to give it that kind of just same with, kind of like I'm Only Sleeping, all those backwards effects and stuff like that. They wanted that dreamlike quality, and that's what you get with Rain. John Lennon's voice is slowed down. The whole, even the drumming, everything sounds fuller and thicker, because they slowed the tape down. They recorded at a faster speed. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on the internet, the original, version of it at the regular speed. But yeah, I think that's cool, because I think most people have not heard that, or most people might not even be aware, that's how that was put together. But yeah, it's kind of like how they did it with Sgt. Pepper. They put Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields. They did remixes of that because that was a single that preceded the Sgt. Pepper album. And that's what they're doing. They're putting Paperback Writer and Rain because that was a single that came out before Revolver. So I think that's very cool. Yeah.
Well, we got some people in the chat now. Everybody's just saying hello to each other, which is nice. Welcome, everybody. Happy Thursday.
Indeed.
So tonight, and I don't know if you guys missed my intro, which was very brilliant, very eloquent. But I did sort of lay out, tonight we're going to be talking about, replacement band members. So you had a band, the original lineup, and then somewhere along the way, either somebody died or somebody left the band, and then they brought in a new musician or a new singer, and it entirely changed the fortunes of the band, or it improved the band's sound, or it had the band go in a different direction. I mean, another band that comes to mind is Iron Maiden, where you had Paul Di'Anno, who did the first 2 albums, and then Bruce Dickinson, with the third album. You know, that's one example. But then conversely, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes somebody, you know, leaves the band and the replacement just doesn't gel. It's a failed experiment. It doesn't work out. You know, I'm thinking of, you know, Sammy Hagar with Van Halen. You know, what a bomb that whole. Just kidding. You know.
Yeah.
I
love Sammy.
I meant to say Gary Sharon. But you know what I'm talking about. You know, and you know, like Journey. What about Journey? Where you know, you got the one guy, Arnie, who you know, had to fill the shoes of Steve Perry. What a thankless task that was.
Yeah, and Steve Perry wasn't the first singer either, right? So like, I don't remember what the name.
They didn't even have us. Well, they, you know, you could say maybe Greg Raleigh, I think, might have been there on their third album, Journey Next. Their first two albums were entirely instrumental, so Journey went through kind of an evolution, pun intended, over the course of their career.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, you know, certainly, you know, we can talk about some, but I'm definitely interested in hearing what everybody else wants to put forth as far as, you know, what was a band member change that was successful? What was one that maybe not so successful, you know? And I'll start off, you know, let's talk about Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett. You know, 1967, Syd Barrett, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. You know, he was responsible for their first two singles, Arnold Lane, See Emily Play, and then their first two very highly regarded, their first album, which was very highly regarded, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And then unfortunately, Syd took too much LSD, started to get very out there, was not able to function as a member of the band, and they eventually kicked him out and they brought in David Gilmour. You know, and it's interesting because to think what the band, where the band would have gone, I'm not sure Pink Floyd would have continued into the 70s if they had stuck with Syd Barrett. I mean, nobody knows. That's one of kind of, you know, the big question mark. What would Pink Floyd have sounded like if Syd Barrett hadn't, you know, kind of had his struggles with mental illness. So that's, you know, one example. I mean, David Gilmour is such a huge part of Pink Floyd now. It's hard to imagine Pink Floyd existing without David Gilmour. But, you know, Josh, what do you think of when we're talking about this topic?
Well, first, I'd love to comment on that because I think it's a great point, you know, and whenever I think about Gilmour, I think about, you know, a lot of people equate Pink Floyd to Roger Waters, and rightfully so. He writes the majority of the songs, or if not all the songs. But and I mentioned this before in the channel, so forgive me if you've heard it. But when Nirvana went into the Hall of Fame, Courtney Love was pissed that Dave Grohl was getting in, and Michael Stipe from REM said, "Your husband may have written all the songs, but it was the dynamic of those three men that created the music. And if you eliminate one of the pieces, it wouldn't have been the same." And that's how I feel about Pink Floyd. Even though Roger Waters wrote all the songs, it's great that the dynamic, or maybe the ebb and flow of him and Gilmour, created such a fantastic catalog of music. When you first presented this to me, Jeff, I was thinking about it, and my thought process was how you could have a band that had multiple replacements, and each one was slightly different, and they were successful, and they failed in the same way. So for instance, like Ozzy Osbourne, he had Randy Rhoads, which is he's in the Hall of Fame on his own. He's one of the greatest guitarists of all time. And when they switched to Jakey Lee, a lot of people love these albums, and I love these albums, and I love Jakey Lee, but they didn't feel like Jakey Lee was a great fit for Ozzy. You know, and he had a lot of clashes with Ozzy, and it was a tumultuous relationship. So it was successful on a commercial standpoint, but at the same time, Ozzy was miserable, Jakey Lee was miserable, right? But then when Zakk Wylde joined the band, I think this is probably my third favorite or second favorite Ozzy album. I think this is incredible. And here's someone that was a young kid that maybe was easier to deal with for Ozzy and Sharon because he was younger and I don't want to say they manipulated him, but certainly they've been known to take advantage of young guitarists. But this album sounds like it's a perfect album. Every single song is great on it. I actually think this album is better than No More Tears. So for me, there's a band that had a lot of band changes. They continued to stay relevant all through the 80s. So yeah, that's the first thing I thought of is like, here's something that had successes and failures in the same breath. So.
Well, you mentioned Ozzy Osbourne. I think the most obvious one is, after Ozzy left Black Sabbath, they brought in Paul Carrack, who would eventually go on to be with Squeeze, Mike and the Mechanics. Paul Carrack did a couple of live shows with Black Sabbath, and it just did not work out. And they ended up bringing in Ronnie James Dio, which did end up working out great. So yeah, you just never know how it's going to go. But Randy Rhoads, yeah, and I think Randy Rhoads, from everything that I've heard, he was going to be leaving Ozzy anyway, because he did not like the idea of recording a live album full of Black Sabbath songs, which eventually became Speak of the Devil. So he was kind of, people think like, oh, well, Randy Rhoads and Ozzy would have continued on and made a bunch of great albums together. I think he was probably on his way out, because he just was like, I'm not playing your former band's songs, but yeah, that was definitely, like you say, with Jake E. Lee. And somebody had mentioned Jake E. Lee actually also. Yeah, Mike's Got the Spins mentioned Jake E. Lee, but then Brian is talking about, Neil Peart, the first Rush album, had a completely different drummer. And I think he was a great drummer. I forget his name, the drummer on the first Rush album, but, just not Neil Peart. And I think if not for Neil Peart, I'm not sure that Rush would have had the longevity that they had, because Neil Peart was not just a great drummer, he was like their lyricist, and pretty much kind of defined the direction that band went in. But yeah, so many great ones. Brandon, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of piggyback really quick there on Josh. Like I said, I showed these a second ago, because Ozzy was definitely one of my picks as well. And I actually kind of skipped on Ozzy, but going from Randy Rhoads, kind of skipping over Jakey, going right to Zach, just because I felt like the stuff that Jakey did, like if Rhoads would have still been around, he could have done those same albums with Ozzy. But it was kind of like when Zach came in, especially going in that early 90s when grunge had kind of made this, you got to get heavier, you got to get thicker, that type of thing. Like that's what Zach brought to the table for Ozzy, that I think allowed Ozzy to continue to go through that time period. And like No More Tears is one of the ones that really stands out at me, of that heavy, thick, that light speed thing that Randy Rhoads used to do so beautifully, was just kind of brushed off with when Zach came with that. So that was a really good pick. Well, another one I came up with, let me just kind of dig through here. So I think sometimes this one gets overlooked, where I'm going to say, like, from an album perspective, it's not that this singer made the group better, but I think it definitely took the group in a different direction and still made it pretty darn fabulous. And I'm going to the Rainbow albums.
Yes.
So you start here, of course, with Rising, where we know Dio and the amazing thing that he is. And, I guess Richie had such a hard time getting along with like everybody. I mean, it seems like there's not a single interview where somebody doesn't say that he was just like the biggest pain in the what. But but on Down to Earth, maybe not one of their biggest albums, but arguably my favorite Rainbow album. But Brian, I always can't remember if it's pronounced like is it Howie or Ho, Howe? I know it's how you spell it, but
I always thought it was Howie, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, I mean, just talk about a guy who kind of going against what I just said, was one of the few that's talked about how much he loved his time in Rainbow and thought it was just really fantastic. And you can actually hear that in the music and his delivery on this album. I mean, it's somewhat poppy, but definitely like just kind of hard radio rock type of stuff, and just such a good feel to it. Especially with songs like Since You've Been Gone or All Night Long. I mean, just like punch you in your gut, straight hard rock stuff. So, I mean, to try to, fill the shoes of someone like like Dio. And I think Brian killed it on this album. He made it just a solid hard rock album with this. So I think that's a replacement that was. Yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna say it was a great pick. You're absolutely right, and I think that when you do replace someone like Dio, it does make a dramatic change, because Dio obviously has one of the greatest voices in rock,
Right.
or did have one of the greatest voices in rock. But he also sang about dragons and sang about things that either you dug or you didn't dig. So I think that's why you see so many great. Dio replaced a lot of great people, and he also was replaced in some instances, like that Rainbow, where they still continued on and did great.
Yeah, I like Rod commented.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Oh, sorry. No, go ahead. No, I was just going to say that's a really good point, Josh, because I never thought about that. As much as we put Dio on the ultimate pedestal, he was kind of a one-trick pony, in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he was great. He did.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just saw Rod's comment about, taking a job as keyboardist for the Grateful Dead is the most hazardous job anybody can have. Of course, he's referring to, Pigpen, obviously, had his struggles with addiction and pretty much drank himself to death. And then I forget the guy's name, like Godot, or it was some sort of French name. And then you had Brent Midland, who, so, very tragically, almost as tragic as the Spinal Tap drum kit, sort of how you had all the, those people very meet on unfortunate end. But, for me, talk about one band member, but how about two? Let's talk about Fleetwood Mac. Fleetwood Mac, how their fortunes changed when Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined the band for their self-titled album. They started out as a Peter Green blues band, and then Peter Green left, and then, you had Jeremy Spencer, you had Bob Welch. Christine McVie, I think, was probably the most commercial songwriter they had, although Bob Welch did have Sentimental Lady on, I think it was the Bare Trees album, which was somewhat commercial. But they were just kind of foundering, they weren't really a commercial band. I think they were just sort of putting out albums, but I don't think that they got a lot of recognition. And then they bring in Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, and then their trajectory shot into the stratosphere when they added both of those, band members.
Yeah, I think it's amazing how. Sorry, Brennan, interrupt. I think it's amazing though how lucky they were to find those two of the most talented songwriters in the world. Who happen to be in a relationship, who happen to be in a band together. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, that was almost the exact thing I was going to say. So you nailed it.
Yeah, crazy to even think about. And the dynamics of a band is so unique. How you take these pieces and sometimes they clash and sometimes they hate each other, but that dynamic works so well together, like a Lennon McCartney, like a Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. And sometimes I think you need that tension.
Yeah. And the other thing that's kind of really magical with Fleetwood Mac too is the way that almost the way they were able to stay more. They never stepped on each other's toes musically. They never got too the drumming never got so complex that it drowned out the smoothness of Nick's voice, or McVie. Just all the different things they did just enough where it fit together perfectly. And that's always the thing I find magical about listening to them is I can go through and listen to a song one time and all I can hear is the bass line. That's all it's standing. Yeah.
Well, the thing about Fleetwood Mac,
or then it's going, next time I listen to it, it's about the drumming. The next thing.
Brandon, you're kind of freezing.
Yeah, I think we're losing you a little bit. But I think your point's taken where, each musician you know, you could hear, and you know, they weren't stepping over each other. They weren't trying to outdo each other. They weren't trying to, you know, outclass each other. And one of the things about Fleetwood Mac is you had three brilliant songwriters. I mean, you had Christine McVie, you had Lindsey Buckingham, you had Stevie Nicks, and yet they never had to fight for space on an album. You know, with the Beatles, you had three songwriters and they were always fighting. George Harrison could never get enough of his compositions on an album. But with Fleetwood Mac, you know, you never hear, well, Christine McVie was unhappy because she couldn't get some of her songs on an album, or Lindsey Buckingham was dominating the record and Stevie Nicks couldn't get any songs in. You know, somehow that partnership worked very well, and that, you know, they all were, it was all about the band. It wasn't about, you know, well, I'm Stevie Nicks and I should have at least 4 songs on the album, or I'm Christine McVie and I should have at least. Somehow they worked out some kind of democratic process where, you know, I mean, romantically they were fighting, but in terms of, you know, they were all, it was all about the band, and it was all about, okay, you know, you had 3 excellent songwriters and they were all coming up with the goods. They probably all could have put out solo albums that would have been amazing, but they managed to make it all fit. You know, on Rumors, everybody brought their best material and it all, you know, coalesced so well. But you know, another, hey, Josh, I'll let you pick your next you know, replacement one, but for me, Fleetwood Mac was going to be top of my list.
Yeah, I think that's a great choice. And it's funny, as I grab the next pick, you mentioned about fighting for songs on an album. Another band that I feel is that way, this is not my pick, but is the Grateful Dead, where they don't, like, you never know what was going to happen. You know, they had In the Dark, which was a huge album in the 80s and dominated by Weir and Garcia. And then the next album, Built to Last, was 90% songs by their keyboardist, Brett Mainland. You know what I mean? Like, so you never knew what they were going to do. But my pick for replacement is a controversial one. And I'm not trying to say that it's better, because if I say it's better, people are going to crucify me. But I definitely think it propelled the band in a different direction. And it also ushered in music that we all love in the 80s. And that's going to be Deep Purple, when they added Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale. I feel like,
yeah,
you know, this was a huge monumental shift in the band staying relevant. This is a fantastic album from start to finish. I think every single song is brilliant on it. If this was a Whitesnake album, it would be my favorite Whitesnake album. That's how much I love this album. I just think it's really great. And if you haven't heard this album, because maybe you're a traditionalist and you only do Mach 2 or, you know, whatever, this is a great album to listen to. And it's one of my favorite albums of the 70s. And I know that people will say, well, this version of Deep Purple is not the best version of Deep Purple. But if you go listen to this, I feel like you listen to this today, it doesn't sound dated at all. And I think it was a great addition. And Glenn Hughes also, up until this day, how many times has he replaced people? You know what I mean? You think about that. Even up into the Dead Daisies, you know what I mean? He was a replacement. So yeah, never really solidified himself as like his creating a band that was recognized with only him. But yeah, that's my choice. Deep Purple. I don't know what you guys, if you love this album or not.
Yeah, no, well, Deep Purple, you know, it's one of those, they're kind of like made famous for how many band changes they had. You had the Mach 1 with Rod Evans, and then you had Ian Gillan, who, you know, replaced Rod Evans and took them in a hard rock, you know, harder rocking direction. And, you know, most people only know Ian Gillan, and I know I'm mispronouncing it, so don't even chastise me in the comment section. But, you know, Ian Gillan, and obviously, you know, had their most popular albums, you know, Smoke on the Water. And, you know, my favorite Deep Purple albums are always In Rock, Fireball, and Machine Head. But, you know, it was really bold to try to replace Ian Gillan. How dare you, you know, like the classic line, they just come off of, you know, Woman from Tokyo,
Yeah.
And now you're going to totally change the personality and the sound of the band. But I think they went in kind of a more, boogie type direction. They got David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes and Tommy Bolin, for the Come Taste the Band album.
Yeah, I don't think any band has pulled off changes quite the way that Purple has. I mean, especially as extreme as it seems sometimes, but I mean, it's still, it's all great stuff from start to finish. It really is. So,
yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what,
Go ahead, Brandon. What's yours, buddy?
I'll show another one here. And actually, I don't know, I wasn't even thinking about this. I was totally screwing up when I was talking about Rainbow. Graham Bonnet was the lead singer of Rainbow. I was getting it confused in my head for some reason, because Brian Hoey was actually
Bad Company,
the replacement for Bad Company. Yeah, that's where I kind of got that twisted. So for someone pulling their hair out because you're watching this later and was like, that's not who it was. Yeah, I know. But yeah, again, this is one where I don't say by any means it got better, but I really do feel like they didn't take a big step down when, Paul Rodgers with Bad Company is just, I mean, it's Paul Rodgers, just was one of the best bluesy, soulful delivery. I still think Shooting Star is one of the, not on this album, but Shooting Star is one of the greatest rock songs ever written. I just think that's absolute perfection. But then when Brian came on and did some of the later albums, like Holy Water, and kind of the same thing. He didn't he kind of had a little bit of a twinge of Paul Rodgers, but just kind of more of that big hard rock passionate voice where he could deliver with such power. I think it kind of gave him a little bit of we still kind of have a Rodgers in the mix, even though Paul's not there anymore. And so like if you needed somebody off of this album, is one of my absolute favorite Bad Company songs. And then of course, How About That off of Here Comes Trouble. Again, that's just one of those songs that just has just such a big rock punch to it. And like I said, I just think he kind of took what Rodgers was doing earlier with some of the more smooth bluesy type of stuff and just kind of took it to more of a rock level. And so I don't think that was a step down for Bad Company at all. That was a pretty good pickup for someone for a group that just lost a guy like Paul Rodgers. Just incredible.
What's incredible is that you have Here Comes Trouble on vinyl.
Or Holy
Well,
Water.
I do have to say this is a boot. I haven't gotten lucky enough to get an OG on.
Holy shit, dude!
I tried to swindle Melinda out of hers. I don't know how many times, but
yeah,
she's nice, but not that nice.
Yeah, I mean that's fantastic. I was gonna be like, wow, yeah, that's a great pick, man. And I love Bad Company. They don't get enough credit.
Oh man, yes. Just great pure rock, pure hard rock, and I love them.
Yeah, and it makes me feel good. It's one of those things that makes me think of the carnival for some reason, like the summer carnival when you go with your friends and it's like Bad Company would be playing over the speakers.
Yeah,
and, it makes me feel good.
What are they in the comments, Josh?
Let's see what we have. So one of the comments I'm not going to read because they picked my pick. But Marty Friedman and from Megadeth, that was a huge monumental shift. Megadeth reached new heights with him in the band. Kiss, people are talking about Kiss, which may come up on my list. David Gilmour on the recent Peter Green tribute concert is fantastic, so we need to see that. Fleetwood Mac, they did do solo albums. Mike's Got the Spin says, what if your lead singer dies after you release Highway to Hell? Yeah. Is there anyone that can replace him? Such a great pick. Definitely. And let's see what else we have. I don't want to read that one. Joe Walsh replacing Bertie Linden, if I'm pronouncing that right. McVie, Nix, Buckingham had solo albums. Let's see. Melinda says, haha, Brandon, if I ever get another copy, it's yours. Oh, Melinda, you're so sweet. She's like she's the queen of the VC. All right. Whose pick is it? Your pick, Jeff?
Yeah, well, and nobody wants to hear about this band, but I don't care. I'm going to put it forward anyway because I think it's an interesting because they're one of these bands that have had different lineups, but they don't have the same kind of notoriety as like a Deep Purple or a Fleetwood Mac. But how about the Byrds? You know, you had the core nucleus of you had Gene Clark, you had Roger McGuinn, you had David Crosby, you had Michael Clark, and you had I forget the other guy. I can't think of his name right now, but you know, and then they ended up firing David Crosby because he was an asshole. Gene Clark left because he didn't want to fly. And then they brought in Graham Parsons, who completely changed the dynamic of that band and moved them into country rock. You know, and so I think that was such a huge shift for them because before they'd kind of been, you know, a little folk rock, kind of that jangly pop sound. And then, you know, when Graham Parsons joined after the Notorious Byrd Brothers for the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album, they totally moved them into, and I mean, you could say the Byrds and Michael Nesmith kind of invented country rock because they were doing it as early as 1968. But that was a big seismic shift for the Byrds. And I mean, they never reached kind of the commercial heights that the original Byrds lineup did, but you know, that was I think kind of kept them relevant and also kind of invented almost a new genre that hadn't been heard before.
Yeah, I think Sweethearts of the Radio, like such a monumental album in terms of influencing what we listened to in the 90s, right? I just feel like that mixture of folk and rock and that dreamy feel that that album has, you know, we saw in a lot of other bands. Yeah, especially someone like the Counting Crows. Like, yeah. I know that's like one of their favorite albums, you know, so great pick, dude.
Cool.
My next pick, it was mentioned in the comments, so I'll do it now. It might be my biggest pick, and it's not a knock against the original singer because I do love Chuck Mosley, and I remember being a kid and hearing "We Care a Lot" and thinking they're singing about the Transformers, you know. And there's a line in that song: "The Transformers are more, you know, more than meets the eye," and I was like, I love this band. And then Mike Patton comes in and not only completely changes the band, but forces the band to change on every single album. And Mike Patton has this theory that every band should only make 3 albums. He goes, after that, you've heard enough. I don't believe in that theory, but it's because he wants to constantly evolve and change. Mike Patton is, Faith No More is one of my favorite bands. And this is actually one of my least favorite Faith No More albums, but I brought this up because I know it's the most recognizable. And it's not that I dislike this album. I really do like this album, but I just felt like they kept getting better. You know, every album like Angel Dust, I feel like is an improvement of this. King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime is better than that. And Album of the Year, they just keep getting better and better and better. I love, you know, a lot of people said this was the birth of that rap rock type of sound. And then on Angel Dust, they went in a completely different direction, and Mike Patton just really sings. So that's kind of what I love about the band. I do love Chuck Mosley. I think he is underrated. So shout out to Chuck. But Mike Patton, that's my next pick.
Yeah, I feel like 1990 was kind of like people were feeling like, what's going to be the new direction? Like, you know, the 80s rock cannot continue as it was. And I think a lot of people thought it was going to be, you know, that kind of like that rap rock that you got with, you know, Faith No More. And maybe that's going to be the new direction. But I don't think anybody saw grunge coming. But, you know, I think with Angel Dust, maybe that's where Faith No More was like, okay, well, I guess it's not going to be rap rock either. Although with kind of new metal, you know, maybe it sort of found its way a little bit later once grunge had kind of run its course. But
right.
Yeah.
And I think with Angel Dust too, like there's a very controversial video you guys can go watch where they're kind of jerks to MTV, where MTV is trying to get them to like talk about grunge or like say like our next album is going to be grunge. And they're like, no, we think it's gonna be easy listening. Like they're just busting balls on MTV really bad. But that's the one thing you say about Faith No More. They're not going. If you think they're gonna do something, they're gonna do the opposite. Just to, I mean, they're one of their bands is band members is openly gay, and they have a song about that in Angel Dust, like in a time frame where people didn't talk about homosexuality. So you have to give them credit of just being like, hey, we are who we are. We're not afraid to show it. And I love that about that band.
Mhm.
Yeah, good pick, man.
Thank you.
All right. So
Josh, if anybody's asking about if anybody's asking about my fantasy team, Josh Allen currently has 9 points.
Okay.
And
There you go.
has a point as well. So, anybody who is worried about my fantasy team, we're doing really well. It's first quarter. I think it's looking good so far. So, all right, Brandon, go ahead.
All right. My next pick is going to be one that's kind of obvious, but maybe gets just kind of skipped over a little bit. And you got to go with bass players from Metallica. I mean, to talk about again some major shifts. I mean, and kind of in some of the most incredible ways. I've always said that I think Metallica as a band from a karma perspective has just been overly greedy when it comes to what they've had as far as bass players go. Because, of course, you have Cliff throughout all the legends of the first albums there, which, basically made them kind of the kings of thrash. And then, of course, when Newstead came along, going to Justice Black, and then, Black Album becoming kind of basically the hard rock / metal version of Dark Side of the Moon, if you will, like, on that same kind of level. And then after losing Jason, still coming around what arguably could be my favorite bass player that's ever been in Metallica, which is Robert T. I mean, that guy to me is I guess I'd say the thing I love about him so much is he's one of the most like humble, almost shy kind of guys. Just when you see his demeanor and just the way he interacts and that type of thing, until you get him on stage and get that axe in his hand, he just goes complete and total beast mode. And I guess it's just always something about that I love, because I've always been one of those people that has this kind of belief, if you will, for myself, especially with a lot of other beliefs I have from a faith perspective and things of that nature. So when I think about listening to metal music and really being into metal and hard rock and stuff, always kind of think I bump it hard, not evil. Like, it's two like really, really different things to me. It's just like the stuff rocks, you can get behind the energy of it, and it's freaking fantastic. But and for some reason, I always get that sentiment from Robert, is that you can be a nice guy, you can be a humble guy, you can be a soft-spoken guy, and you can get in there and bang heads with the best of them. And he just personifies that every time I watch him play. So again, it's just something magical about that, to think when you go through the horrors and all the crap that Metallica has gone through, you got to have Cliff, Jason, and Robert. I mean, good gracious, just awesome stuff there with the changes that those guys went through.
And
well,
you could
Dave, I was gonna say Dave Mustaine, changing over to Kirk Hammett too. That was
yeah.
And Robert Trujillo also replaced the original bassist from Suicidal Tendencies, and they reached new heights once he joined the band. So he was replacement for two awesome bands.
Yeah, just a great player. He really is. Just,
you ever hear "The Plague That Makes Your Booty Move" by Infectious Grooves?
Off the top of my head, I can't say.
You should listen to that album. It's a very difficult vinyl to find. Do not buy the reissue. They did a reissue in Glow in the Dark, and it sounds terrible. But wait for a new reissue or try to find an OG. Infectious Grooves, The Plague That Makes the Booty Move. And Robert plays on that album. Ozzy plays on that album, too. He plays on one song. But, Brandon, I'm telling you, I know you. We're buddies. You're going to love this album. I'm just telling you. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard that. Yeah,
it's like a funk metal album. Just fantastic.
Nice.
Well, and Sam St. John, who joined our chat, brought up the fact that William Campbell, who replaced Paul McCartney when Paul McCartney died in 1966, not only was he a doppelganger for Paul McCartney, but sounded exactly like him, played bass exactly like Paul McCartney. I mean, that was like a seamless transition.
Yeah, even Linda didn't notice the difference. That's how good he was.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm glad Sam brought that up because that needed to be said as well.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff, it's your pick, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm always the redheaded stepchild when it comes to these live streams because you guys have all the cool picks and I have all the dorky picks. But I'm gonna go like Vince Clarke for Depeche Mode was the founding member. He's the one who got Depeche Mode together. And after one album, he said, sayonara, I'm out of here. And they did it as a trio for a while. And then they brought in Alan Wilder, which probably people are like, whatever, what's Josh's pick? But no, I mean, anybody out there who's watching, the two of you who are Depeche Mode fans out there know what a difference Alan Wilder made the Depeche Mode sound. And, it was like, well, what difference did he make? Well, he was the one, Depeche Mode, Dave Gahan, Martin Gore, and, Martin Gore and Andy Fletcher, did not have the discipline to stay in the studio once they'd recorded their parts. But Alan Wilder, is pretty much responsible for the Violator album, the sound that you got, because after everybody went to the pub, they would all like, okay, we've done our part. We're going to go hang out at the pub. Now, Alan Wilder would stay like late into the night and make sure like the drum sound was right and that the mix was right. And he was very meticulous about their sound. And that's why, there's kind of a step down after Alan Wilder left the band after the Songs of Faith and Devotion album. They never sounded the same after that. And I think, is because Alan Wilder was the one who put in the time and, kind of put in the work to craft their sound, to make sure that everything sounded right. So anyway, that's mine. And everybody, everybody's like, okay, let's get to Josh and Brandon again.
No, that's a great pick.
The ultimate pick, yeah.
So my next pick, I could have gone either way because they've replaced the singer multiple times. And each time that they've done it, they stayed relevant. And I actually enjoy the first singer, which was Neil Turbin. I think that he did a great job on this album. But they reached monumental popularity with Joey Belladonna. And I think what set them apart with Joey Belladonna joining the band was that he had a classic rock sound. He had a voice that he could sing Journey. He could sing, Boston songs and hold his own. Where obviously we all know James Hetfield and Dave Mustaine, Tom Araya were not classically musicians in terms of their singing performance. It was more street and edgy. But Anthrax has a sound that even though it's thrash, it's steeped in a classic rock sound. You could tell that Anthrax loved those bands, and it gave them a commercial appeal that some of the others didn't have. Now they would eventually go on to do John Bush, which was a singer of Armored Saint, and some people said, oh, they got grungy, or this was their grunge period. I don't necessarily feel that way. And I loved the John Bush era too. But I think that Joey Belladonna is my choice, my next one. I just think he did a great job. And obviously all of those, I don't really think they have a bad album with Joey Belladonna. I really don't. I love all of them. So yeah, there you go. That's my pick.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but on the Sound of White Noise, I love the fact they brought Michael McDonald in to do harmonies behind John Bush, and I think that really enhanced their sound a lot. You don't hear a lot about how, Michael McDonald really, kind of expanded their sound and, kind of made it a little bit more commercial, but
taking it to the streets.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say awesome hype sticker on that. That's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. This was a gift from my main man, Aaron. So this was my number one growl. And yeah, look at that, guys. not
That's
a
awesome.
single hit or whatever, right? This is Aaron, I love you, brother. It's so great.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna go with one that Jeff is definitely less cool than anyone that you'll ever be able to pick. All right. And what I'm gonna go with is one from the time, right? Everybody, I'm watching everybody, but a lot of people probably remember them from this album, which is really kind of the only one they got a lot of commercial success from. With stuff like Ice Cream Castles and The Bird and Jungle Love and stuff like that. Of course, obviously, when Purple Rain came out, this was the album that kind of played through that. But originally, the lead singer of the time was a guy by the name of Alexander O'Neal, right? And so again, I do think that it was maybe a little bit of a step up for the time because Morris Day just fit more so what they were doing and all that good stuff. But as a solo artist, Alexander O'Neal is one of my favorite 80s solo artists. Probably his biggest hit, if you haven't heard about him and want to kind of check him out, is a song called "If You Were Here Tonight." Just kind of one of those awesome 80s R&B, kind of ballads, love song type of things. But yeah, I think that was kind of a real interesting switch because when Prince was kind of first coming on the scene, he toured with Rick James. And like we don't necessarily think about them musically being the same, but when you really kind of think about it, they do have a lot of similarities. Like, they were doing stuff that just wasn't quite like what everybody else was doing. A lot of sexuality, a lot of theatrics, and just kind of their own unique personas. Like nobody else was Rick James and nobody else was Prince. Well, they always found themselves in a lot of kind of competition with each other. And not only did it come to the stage of trying to outperform each other each night, but also with the side projects they started doing. So The Time was one that Prince came up with, and Alexander O'Neal was the original lead singer of The Time, but Prince was kind of taking too much control over what they were doing. So Alexander decided to split, and he brought in his old friend, I'm going brain dead. Morris Day. Yeah. And they just kind of, took off from there. So yeah, even though they were a great band prior to that, it was definitely a nice step up of what Morris kind of brought to the scene at that time. So definitely less cool, you'll say, Jeff.
No, I think that's a fantastic pick. And my question for you is, I think about that time period of Prince where, all the side projects that he had that he wasn't necessarily in the band, but you knew he was controlling, like Tevin Campbell and The Time and Sheila E. Do you feel at all that he's not recognized enough for that? Do you feel like it took away from, he should have kept the songs for himself? Because a lot of these bands he wrote the songs for, or at least had a hand in it. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, Sheila E., Sheena Easton, the Bangles, just so many different groups that he had his hands in. And to me, I almost think it was like a separate part of Prince where he wanted to have something where he was behind the scene. And because if he wanted to take credit for it, he easily could have, right?
Right.
But yeah, I think a lot of people just don't know. And I mean, even to this day, I just seem to discover songs all the time where I realized he didn't realize he had a hand in it, which I don't want to get into a whole other discussion or anything, but that what you just said right there is one of the very reasons why I've always said I think the greatest pop star of all time is Prince and not Michael Jackson, because nobody can do what either one of those guys did, right? I mean, no one can deliver like Prince, no one can deliver like Mike. But the one thing that Prince had that Michael Jackson didn't, Prince could make other people stars. Michael Jackson couldn't do that. Prince could write songs and that type of thing that other people went to the stratosphere and you had no idea Prince was involved. And so I just think that piece, like what you asked there, that's just part of his genius. So it doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah. And Prince could have just been a guitarist and been one of the greatest guitarists that has ever walked the face. He won. I'm sorry, Michael Jackson fan. Prince won. Jeff, there's a great question in here that I don't know the answer, but I bet you would. Why didn't the Police ever try to replace Sting?
I mean, I think when you're talking about a trio, And the fact that it's Sting, I mean, each one of those guys, I mean, it's like, why didn't Rush try to replace Neil Peart? Well, because Neil Peart's irreplaceable. You know, with the Police, Sting is irreplaceable in the Police. You know, he's such the foundation of what they were. I mean, who the hell were they going to bring in? I mean, you know, to be honest, who's going to be a bassist, songwriter, singer that's going to replace Sting? I mean, it's impossible, you know. I mean, I think it would have been easier, although I still think impossible to replace you know, Andy Summers or Stuart Copeland. I just think because that nucleus there was so irreplaceable. You know, why didn't Led Zeppelin replace John Bonham? Because you just can't, you know. I mean, they're just so irreplaceable. I mean, that would be my answer.
I think
especially with such a unique lead singer,
right.
like, you know, like just, you know, ones that just nobody else out there sounds like them. That's always just a very hard thing to replace.
Yeah,
I agree, and I think that the other Police members, Stuart Copeland and Andy Summers, are very smart because they know if the Police were to announce a tour tomorrow, it would be the biggest tour on the planet, right? Or at least one of them. So just keep Sting happy. Like, don't try to piss them off where you're never going to get back together, if that makes sense.
right. I mean, no, I mean, I think you're totally right about that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Are you reading the comments or?
Yeah. Are there any more that we want to talk about?
Let's see. Some people.
Yeah. There's one comment I'll say there where Mike's got the spin said, I heard Morris say that after Prince made it big, he never forgot where he came from, and he came back and got us. And that's kind of a cool part of that story too. Again, not to get too in depth in it, but like when Prince made it big, I think Morris was working like a car dealership or something like that. And Prince just called him out of the blue and was like, you know, hey, I'm starting this band and all this type of stuff. And there was some big event they were going to, some fancy party. And he was kind of bringing Morris to kind of show him off as the new lead singer. And so Morris was like, I have no idea like what I'm going to be doing in the room, and act cool. It's like, that's all. If anybody says anything to you, just say it's cool. And Morris said, like, I just put on this big persona and I just walked in the room and people would ask me questions and all I would say is cool and walk away. And they were looking at me like I was an idiot. But he was like, that little introduction for me alone just threw him into this different atmosphere. And like I said, it was just Prince reaching out to him I said, he's working at a car dealership. I'm like, dude, come do this. And a few months later, he's all over TV and everything else, doing Purple Rain and all that stuff. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Absolutely. Daddy Bog says Peter Cetera in Chicago. I always thought Peter Cetera was originally in Chicago, but he just wasn't in the forefront. Did he join the band later?
No, he was an original member of Chicago, but I think he's talking about replacing Peter Cetera.
Okay.
You know.
Yep. King Crimson had several great replacement players. Bill Buford, John Wilton, Adrian. My phone is so tiny, guys. Adrian Below, Tony Levin. So I apologize if I read the names wrong, but King Crimson.
Yeah.
You have another pick, Jeff?
Yeah, so I'm totally going to go out in left field on this one because, and again, like, you know, I know nobody gives a shit about my picks. Nobody comments on them. Whoa, it's me. Whatever. But I don't care, you know, but I'm going to go to Miles Davis. And when John Coltrane passed away, he had to find a new saxophone player, and Wayne Shorter in the 60s took over as a saxophone player and, you know, helped lead Miles in a new direction, you know, sort of that post-bop sound that he had, you know, with all those great 60s albums, which I don't know if people, you know, are familiar with, you know, ESP, Miles Smiles, you know, those great albums where you had Herbie Hancock in the band, you had Tony Williams on drums, you know, that great ensemble that he had, you know, and he had to move in another direction. It's one of those, you know, he had to adapt. I mean, John Coltrane passed away in 1967, and, you know, Miles moved in a different direction, a more abstract, a more kind of experimental direction. You know, and we know in the 70s he took it to, you know, a completely different level. But you know, that would be one that I would throw out there for consideration.
Both legendary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, gigantic names there, man. Jeez. Davis, Shorter, Coltrane. Oof.
My next pick is, in no way am I trying to say this person is better than the original, because the original is probably the most beloved member of the band, or one of the most beloved members of the band. But I am going to go with Eric Carr. I think it was a change that needed to happen, because even though the albums in the 70s are my favorite era of Kiss, I do love the 80s albums of Kiss. And I feel like people can't say that they like the 80s albums of Kiss without saying, well, I like the 70s better. It's not everyone, but I'm just saying there's some people. It's like saying, I like Sammy Hagar, but of course David Lee Roth is better. They have to like tie this in. But Eric Carr was fantastic. He was a great drummer. You know, it was a heavier sound than Peter Criss, a more heavy metal sound, so to say. And I think that it fit the band perfectly. I hate how they screwed him over, you know, like I wish I hadn't read that story about when he was dying of cancer. But that being said, I think he's a great member of the band. And that is my pick, Eric Carr.
Yeah, I'm real sorry it didn't work out with Peter Criss. And I know, you know, they've all got different stories as to how that whole thing went down. But, you know, Peter Criss could sing, you know. Did he write Beth, or was that, did somebody else?
He did write Beth. He didn't write the other songs. He did not write Hard Luck Woman, but he wrote Beth.
Yeah. I mean, when you think of that 70s Kiss, I mean, they really were like the Beatles. They each had different personalities. Obviously, their makers kind of, you know, really told the story about their personalities. But, you know, Ace was singing songs and writing songs. Peter, although he was kind of like Ringo in the way, like he got, you know, the leftovers on a Kiss album, but still, I mean, he was a huge part of Kiss. I mean, he definitely was. He was the Kiss man. He was the fourth part of that, you know, quartet. And, you know, Eric Carr was a great drummer, but he was just kind of like, you know, in the background, and fantastic drummer, but he just kind of didn't have that presence that Peter Criss did. You know, you don't see anybody wearing a Eric Carr Halloween costume, you know, in the day. But it was just that, you know, and I know like Peter Criss certainly shoulders a lot of the blame. I think he lost interest in the band, and, you know, I think his skills kind of atrophied a bit. But you know, I still wish things could have gone differently. But, you know, Eric Carr really I think was the right drummer for them to lead them into the 80s. And Peter Criss was just not an 80s drummer. You know, he was fine in the 70s, but, you know, just like Brian Jones was not going to be the guitarist that was going to, you know, lead the Stones into a new decade. Same with Peter Criss. He just did not have the chops, if you can say that about a drummer, but he did not have the chops that Eric Carr did.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting ready to say too, is that Carr was the perfect transition into what they needed for the 80s, which was it's not about the vocal harmonies and that stuff from the 70s, if you will, which was fantastic, but it's like it's time to go into the 80s. You got to pick the punch up a little bit, and Carr was perfect. Perfect.
And it's funny that, you know, you've mentioned the Rolling Stones a couple of times, and I don't know if this is going to be your last pick, but what about Ron Wood? Do you feel like that added to the band, or what are your thoughts on that, Jeff?
I'm a big Mick Taylor fan. Like, Mick Taylor is probably my favorite Stones guitarist. I think Ron Wood was fine. You know, I got nothing against Ron Wood. And I think it was always like, you know, from the point that Mick Taylor left, it was always going to be Mick and Keith's band no matter what. So whatever direction they took the band, I think Ron Wood was just kind of along for the ride, and he was a serviceable, you know, guitarist. I love Tattoo You. I love Some Girls. I love some of those Stones albums, the late 70s and early 80s. But you know, my favorite albums have always been Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, you know, the ones with Mick Taylor.
Yeah.
Always, I think, rise above the others. But, you know, I think Ron Wood was, I think, a perfectly fine. I mean, that was his dream band. Ron Wood wanted to be in the Rolling Stones since before he joined the Faces, you know. But
yeah, I think I was just gonna say I agree with you. He was a great selection. It wasn't earth shattering. It didn't propel the band in some awesome direction, but it kept the band at a commercial level, and still, I think he added something, just not as monumental as you said with, you know,
right. Past. Yeah. I mean, it was sort of, he kept them afloat. He was what they needed him to be, no more, no less. And yeah, I mean, after, in the late 70s, the Stones, they were not the greatest rock and roll band in the world, but they were not embarrassing themselves either. I think they were a perfectly fine, solid rock and roll band. They weren't trying to rest on their laurels. They were coming up with some new, interesting stuff, but that was no fault or credit to Ron Wood. He was just kind of, the piece of the puzzle that they inserted, and I think it worked fine. So, nice. Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Van Halen. Okay.
All right.
And you know how I feel about Sammy Hagar, and I know, and I'm sure you're waiting for me to say, "Oh my God, totally went in the toilet when Sammy Hagar came on board," but I'm really not. I mean, I to be honest, I can't imagine, like, David Lee Roth. That split was going to happen. It's through no fault of Sammy Hagar. David Lee Roth wanted to be a movie star. He pissed off the other members of Van Halen, whether he left, whether he got kicked out of the band. I think he just left. Regardless of how it went down, I think Sammy Hagar, and it hurts me to say this, it does, but I think Sammy Hagar was the perfect replacement for David Lee Roth, because look at 5150, what an incredible album that was. And I mean, give me another lead singer who could have replaced David Lee Roth and been successful in Van Halen. I can't think of one off the top of my head. And you hear stories about, they would entertain the idea of Patti Smythe, and Daryl Hall, claims that he got approached about that job. I mean, it could have gone so much worse than it did. But I think Sammy Hagar, as much as I like to joke about him and the fact that he kind of, softened up their lyrical content, but Sammy Hagar, I feel, was the perfect fit for Van Halen. And I would I have loved for David Lee Roth to have continued on with Van Halen into the late 80s and 90s? Absolutely. But that just was not going to happen. Would I have loved Bon Scott to not choke on his own vomit and died? Yeah, but it happened. I can't change the past. But I feel like, as strong of an album, 5150 is just an amazing album, and I think Sammy Hagar, look, I'm not a huge Sammy Hagar guy, but I think he did great. I think he stepped into that role. I think it was not a huge seismic shift. People who loved 1984 loved 5150. You didn't have like, oh my God, this album's a piece of crap, I'm totally, jumping off the Van Halen bandwagon. You didn't see that. And I think that's to Sammy's credit. Sammy was such a charismatic frontman. He already was an established personality. So I think he stepped into that role. he could, I mean, and he didn't have to. He had a huge hit with, you know, I Can't Drive 55. He did not need Van Halen. He could have been, you know, very fine and well to continue on as a solo artist. But I think, you know, I'm going to give him his due. You know, 5150 was an incredible album. I think those 4 Van Halen albums that they did with Sammy Hagar, 5150 is my favorite, but I think the other 3 too. You know, they're great albums. You know, it hurts me to admit it, but they just are.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because I know you're not a Sammy Hagar fan. You know that I am. And just to clarify for the world, I do love the David Lee Roth era of Van Halen. And that's when I was introduced to Van Halen. But I think for Sammy, the difference for me and why I don't have any disdain for him is because that was a point in my life. It was a very exciting point in my life where you have your first girlfriend, you have, you're going out without your parents. And that was a great soundtrack, those albums. And, you know, having a first girlfriend and hearing a song like, Why Can't This Be Love? And it didn't affect me in a negative way where I sat there and went, this is not On Fire, you know, or this is not Running with the Devil. I love those songs. And I didn't have to worry about comparing the two because I was too young to even care to compare the two. So, yeah, I think Sammy Hagar was a great replacement. Is it the same band? No, it's a completely different band. But a lot of that's on Eddie because Eddie wanted to be a synth band. He wanted to add synths to the band. He wanted a different direction. I think that if he tried to mimic the David Lee Roth era, they would have failed.
Yeah, big time.
You can't compete with David. You just can't. There's never been anyone like him again. There's been lots of imitators, but
right. Yeah, there's a couple of great things you said there, like when you talked about at the age you were at and, you know, girlfriends and that type of thing. It's like, you know, I remember my first real girlfriend in high school, and this is back in the day before cell phones and all of that type of stuff. So we were going on a basketball trip and I called her from the payphone at the school and we talked for a moment and I got on the bus and one of the first songs I listened to is Feel So Good off of OU 812. And it's like, to this day, every time I hear that song, it just reminds me of that very first girlfriend, just how amazing that feeling was, you know? So yeah, that just, it makes total sense. And Jeff, what you were saying about, I think we all tend to say it is like, Sammy the way around. And I think Sammy kind of did a little bit of a magic trick that we don't pay attention to. Van Halen became a band for Sammy Hagar. Hagar didn't go to Van Halen. And because if you think about it, if he never even connected with Van Halen, much of that sound would have been I think the exact same thing that Sammy would have been putting out with solo albums, you know. But you know, it always came across as him joining Van Halen, but I just never really felt that happen. And even when you listen to stuff like further down the road, or like, you know, with 13 and you know, like songs like Deeper Kind of Love and stuff like that, where he's doing a solo thing. If someone told you that was a lost Van Halen song that he did with them, you believe it in a heartbeat, because it's just the same thing that Sammy did in all of his solo stuff. So it was a perfect mixture, perfect time. And yeah, I personally could not live without either one of them when it comes to the songs and the albums I listen to the most. I listen to more Van Hagar than Van Halen, but I can never do without either.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that initially put me off Van Hagar was 5150. My mom hated Van Halen until Sammy Hagar became the lead singer. Then all of a sudden, she's like the big fan. I'm like, you know, it's kind of like soccer mom, right? You know, Van Hagar, you know, sort of like Van Halen for soccer moms. You know, a little bit, but it was like, I remember my mom like hating, you know, Diver Down, hating, you know, 1984, you know, didn't want to hear it, you know, wouldn't let me play it in the car. And then all of a sudden, Sammy Hagar joined, and it's like, ooh, isn't Why Can't This Be Love a great song? Ooh, isn't Dreams a great song? Like,
That's probably the best argument you ever made.
Exactly. I can understand.
Understanding why they hate that album.
Me and my mother have
That's a good
never
one.
agreed on a song, so that's fantastic, Jeff. Yeah, and I can tell you that, you know, for those of you that didn't,
it is very true though. Like Roth was all about the love.
yeah. For those of you that didn't see my video, I did a review of the Taylor Hawkins concert, and that Van Halen part, I was like a kid in a candy store. I was like sitting on the edge of my seat. I'm like, I'm sure you guys might have got annoyed with the millions of texts I was sending you, but I was just so excited to hear Van Halen music, you know, and Wolfie was shredding, and you could see the joy on everyone's face. Yeah, it just made me wish they did an Eddie Van Halen tribute. You know, I wish they could just somehow find a way to get all the pieces together and do some sort of tribute for Eddie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because wasn't Wolfgang Van Halen their bassist, and then in the Taylor Hawkins concert, he's like shredding all of Eddie's licks.
Yeah. And there's video of him doing Eruption on YouTube, and he does it spot on. And, you know, the thing is that, like, he was playing with his father since he was a kid, and he learned all those Van Halen songs. He learned all the Sammy songs, all the David Lee Roth songs, because Eddie didn't tell him who they were bringing back. He's just like, just learn the songs. And he learned to play them on all instruments. You know, he could play them on drums, play them on bass, play them on guitar. And so he's definitely got the talent. It's, you know, I don't think we'll ever see him front, you know, or play guitar for a Van Halen type band, but I would go for a tribute show and do what they did for Taylor Hawkins, where they swap out some of the members, you know, like have David go out there, sing a song, have Sammy go out, sing a song. You can even have Gary Sharon sing a song. I don't care who you
like it would legitimize the new Van Halen if you brought Michael Anthony back. Like Wolfgang Van Halen is now the lead guitarist. We're bringing Michael Anthony back. Right. You know, we've got David Lee Roth back, and obviously, you know, you've got Alex. But don't you feel like that would at least lend some legitimacy? Like if you're going to put out a Van Halen product without the, you know, I mean, basically the entire. I mean, Eddie Van Halen was Van Halen. Let's be honest. But if you're going to try and sell us a version of Van Halen without its most significant member, wouldn't it help to bring Michael Anthony back and then have Wolfgang Van Halen? Just like, you know, if you're going to sell us a version of Led Zeppelin, you know, doesn't it help to have John Bonham's son, you know, like the drummer?
Yeah.
So
I agree. I'm excited about the LA concert for Taylor Hawkins. And did you get to watch any of it, Jeff? Did you watch the Rush or the Queen parts?
I did not. I just haven't had the time to, but I've been enjoying your reviews of.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Definitely Google some of it. The AC/DC part was great. I just think that it's great that they, instead of playing nonstop Foo Fighters songs, played the songs that he loved, you know, and to pull out like the Jeff Buckley tribute. You know, it's like, hey, Taylor loved this album, so we're going to play 2 songs off Grace. It's like things like that were so unexpected. I felt that it really spoke to, because I guarantee you that there was something like, you know, 50,000 people there. There was probably a lot of people there that had never listened to Grace, right? But they were like, hey, this is one of Taylor's favorite albums. You should hear it. And here's 2 songs from it. I think that was incredible. And I'm excited to see what they do with the LA show, because it's a whole different cast of characters. You know, you've got
a soundtrack album.
Yeah, I think that they could. They did that for Freddie Mercury, and all the money went to AIDS research, right? Taylor Hawkins, this money is going towards Music Cares, which is the foundation so that musicians have health insurance. So yeah, I could definitely see them putting this out on like a soundtrack or a you know, some sort of Blu-ray release or something. But it was 6 hours long. It was long. And Trent Reznor the other day, he played live, and he even talked about it. He goes, you know, I turned it on just to pay tribute in my own mind because he knew him, but he's like, I wasn't really thinking I was going to be invested in it. And he's like, I found myself 6 hours later crying, watching it. Like, he watched the entire thing. And I think that it just, the same thing happened to me where I had plans that day. Like, Michelle's like, we're going to go here, we're going to go here. And I just got like sucked right into the drama of it. To open up with Oasis, you know, it's like, okay, well, now we're going to do an Oasis tribute to open the show. You know what I mean? Like, and Liam Gallagher comes out, and then to go, you know, just one David Bowie tribute next. And then after that, we're going to do Van Halen tribute. Then we're going to do an AC/DC tribute. Then we're going to do, it was like, I just hadn't seen anything like it. You know, with Queen, when they did the reunion show, I mean, the tribute show to Freddie Mercury, if you remember it, they had Metallica come out. Well, Extreme came out, played a few Extreme songs. Metallica came out and played a few Metallica songs. And then Guns N' Roses came out and played a few Guns N' Roses songs. And then after that, it was like, okay, we're going to play Queen songs for us tonight. Instead of that, it was like, hey, we're bringing out, we're going to play the music that this person loved, and we're going to bring out different people to help perform it. And I just thought that was great.
Yeah, well, and it just, I think it speaks to how beloved Taylor Hawkins was. Because to be honest with you, I'm not a Foo Fighters fan. I'm just not. And I had no idea who Taylor Hawkins was until he died. But the fact that you have a tribute concert, you have all these huge name acts, you know, rolling out there and putting together a show for this guy. I mean, that didn't happen when Chris Cornell died. You didn't have like this big tribute, at least not that I remember anyway. But, you know, especially a drummer who didn't sing, I don't think he wrote any of the Foo Fighters songs, but just the fact that you had all these people coming together for, you know, Taylor. And by all accounts, he was a great guy. It seemed like he was a real, you know, sweetheart of a man. And, you know, it seemed like, you know, he was dealing with a lot of stuff and, you know, maybe emotionally couldn't handle touring. And it was a big burden and stress on him. But yeah, I think that was just really a sweet tribute to him and playing what he loved. What a great, you know, I don't know. Yeah, we should all be so lucky to have, you know, people do that for us. But
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, Rush gets back together for you. You know what I mean? You think about that. Like, that's what a great person this guy was. I mean, everybody did love him. It seemed like that when he entered a room, he was instantly like, you were the most important person in the world. That's what everybody kept saying. Like, if he walked in a room right now with the four of us, he would make you feel so important, even though he is Taylor Hawkins, the drummer of Foo Fighters. And I think that's how, like, bands like Rush or Queen would be like, we want to pay tribute to this guy. You know, like, he's just a fantastic human. They said at one point during the show, they said that he would go into Guitar Center and hang out in the drum room and talk to all these kids. And then when the kids were leaving, the guy who runs the Guitar Center would say, just so you know, Taylor bought you that kit before he left. And he would do that constantly. He'd go down to Guitar Center and just see a kid, and he would buy him all new equipment.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And he didn't tell the kid he was doing it. He waited. He just told the owner, he's like, hey, when that kid's leaving, let him know that I bought him the set.
That's so cool.
That's very cool. Well, I hope, you know, if I pass away or whatever, I hope Chris Prophy organizes a concert and plays some OMD and some Yaz and some Depeche Mode, you know.
I love it. Chris, Jeff's not planning on dying, so don't rush to learn those songs.
No, but I'm just saying, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, and Chris Prophy doesn't organize some kind of, you know, tribute concert and
play those songs. Well, we totally will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll call it the
the
Sophistopop tribute.
Exactly. Glenn Calloway. We'll all, you know, I'll learn the lyrics right now to personally.
And Jeff Buckley, you know, Jeff Buckley. Yeah, I expect him to be on the playlist as well.
I played that album for Carter this weekend. And you know, it's so funny because I'm just trying to point out these little things about like his songs, especially on vinyl. If you haven't heard that album on vinyl, I know all of you have, but you know, just like little guitar parts. I'm like, Carter, wait for this little guitar part to come in. I want you to hear this, and it's like, that's what I love about Carter being into music is like, playing him these albums and saying, I want you to focus on this one little part. It's going to come out of the left speaker, and that album is perfect for that.
Have you heard, do you have that album, Brandon?
The Buckley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Great album.
So great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
fun.
Jeff, you purchased it for me. So thank you, brother.
Yeah, no problem. Well, and you bought it for me too, and I scratched my copy when I dropped it. Scratched it. I remember that.
Oh.
I know you were so angry that day. I'm like, you have another one coming.
Yeah, well, that was one of those like, God, and I'm always doing stupid stuff like that. I'm my own worst enemy sometimes when it comes to my vinyl collection. But yeah, I don't know. Who are we on, or are we just kind of throwing stuff out there?
I think, did we all give our 5?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I had one other that I was just going to show.
I have one more too. I'll flash really quick.
Okay.
Yeah. Obviously, Dio replacing Ozzy. Just fantastic. I love the Ozzy era, but I do love the 2 Dio albums, Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. So.
Well, there's 3 Dio albums, really.
Oh yeah, because he came back, right? And I do love that one.
Dehumanizer.
Dehumanizer. I can never pronounce it. Yeah, exactly. That one. That's a good one too.
Well, the last one I had sticking out, not necessarily these albums, but more about the men kind of going to Motown, starting with the Temptations. David Ruffin was the one that, kind of put him on the map. And then when his head got a little too big and got kicked out, they brought in Dennis Edwards to replace him, and they kept going pretty darn strong.
Awesome.
So Temptations there.
Nice.
Wow.
So do you want to announce, Jeff, what we're doing next week?
Yeah, so anybody who's in the chat or anybody who's watching this after the fact, I had done a live stream last weekend. And what I did was we did a 32, it was a synth pop tournament. What we did is we took 32 bands and we did almost like an NCAA tournament where we seeded them, and then we had matchups. We had Pet Shop Boys versus Erasure. We had Depeche Mode versus New Order. We had Soft Cell versus Eurythmics. And so I think going forward, one of the ideas that we'd like to do in our next live streams would be put together a 32 team tournament, and they could be songs, they could be bands, they could be albums. And eventually, we would have like a championship. What is the top 80s metal album of all time? What is the top 1960s song of all time? Just whatever the theme is. What is our, I think next week we're talking about doing a tournament of 80s versus 90s soundtracks. And so what we would do is we would have our brackets and we would throw it open. Anybody who's participating in the chat, you can say, okay, we want to do the Lost Boys, Pretty in Pink, Breakfast Club, whatever it might be, Footloose. And we'll start filling up the brackets, and then we'll have, teams playing each other. We're going to have, the Lost Boys against, whatever the soundtrack might be, versus Ghostbusters, or, we're going to have The Big Chill versus Stand By Me, or we're going to have, whatever the soundtracks. And then, we'll have each soundtrack advance until we get the championship. So we'll have the championship will be the number 1 80s soundtrack versus the number 1 90s soundtrack, and have them go head to head, and everybody will vote. Anybody who's in the chat, not only will you help determine the teams that will be in the tournament, or the bands or the songs or the soundtracks that will be in the tournament, but you guys will vote, and we'll find out what is the ultimate soundtrack, 80s or 90s soundtrack of all time.
I love it. And man, is Stand By Me and The Big Chill 2 fantastic soundtracks.
Mm-hmm.
I love both of those. And Lost Boys.
Head to head.
Oh yeah. I'm a stickler for soundtracks. I will buy them. I see the the cover art and I get all nostalgic about the movie.
Yeah.
You think about this, think about like Empire Strikes Back versus Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know what I mean? Like even instrumental scores are like,
Right.
Fantastic. And I wonder, I'm going to be interested when we get all the boys on there and the people in the chat to see if your thoughts on the movie influence your thoughts on the soundtrack. Because I do know that there's soundtracks that I love that I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the movie, but there's movies I love and that propels the soundtrack to the next level. Like I love the Lost Boys movie. I love the soundtrack, but I have a feeling even if the movie sucked, I'd still love that soundtrack. It's just one of those that is fantastic to me, you know? But I don't know. We get to save it for next week.
Well, we're already getting people throwing out soundtracks. We got Eddie and the Cruisers, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Streets of Fire, Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's how it's going to work, though. What we're going to do is next week, I'm going to have a bracket, and then we're going to throw it open like you guys are doing right now. And I'm going to be like, okay, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Eddie and the Cruisers, Streets of Fire, Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink. We're just going to go through until we fill that bracket, and then we're going to start with the first matchup. Okay, Eddie and the Cruisers versus the Tootsie soundtrack. And then, or whatever it is, or even Purple Rain. Purple Rain technically is a track. Purple Rain, going against, Desperately Seeking Susan or whatever, I don't know, whatever, it might be. And then just find out what's an ultimate soundtrack based on your guys' input.
And you think about the 90s had some iconic ones too, like The Crow, Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, Judgment Night. It goes on and on. There was some great ones from the 90s. So it'll be interesting to see. The 80s are iconic. It's going to be some tough battles. Yeah, especially since we're all products of the 80s, like even when we were born in the 70s, the 80s we're all going to movies.
Yeah.
Even like a soundtrack like Glengarry Glen Ross, where you've got some of that great jazz. I think Wayne Shorter's on that soundtrack, but that doesn't immediately stand out as a soundtrack, but that's an amazing one too. Or Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs.
Oh yeah, those are amazing. The Wes Anderson ones, like Rushmore. That's one of my favorite soundtracks. And speaking of Glengarry Glen Ross, I do have a Coffee is for Closers tattoo.
Let's see it.
I do, yeah. It's right up there. It says it's a Starbucks cup and it says Coffee is for Closers, and it says Big Dad, fuck you.
That's such an amazing movie. God, like, and the talent in that movie. You're not allowed to say Kevin Spacey anymore, but he's amazing. Jack Lemmon is incredible in that movie. Al Pacino. It's just like the creme de la creme of Hollywood is in that movie. And I think it's like, doesn't it set the record for the number of times they use the F-bomb?
It's so much. He's like, what makes you so special? He's like, you see this watch? This watch costs more than what you made last year.
They wrote that scene for Alec Baldwin. That was not in the original stage play.
That's so good.
Such an important part of that's like one of the most memorable scenes in that whole movie.
Yeah. Trevor says The Last Action Hero, and I have to agree. That is like one of my all-time grails. Alice in Chains is on there. Megadeth is on there. That's a great 90s soundtrack. Absolutely. Clerks, that's another great one.
Yes, Clerks. Oh my God.
Love that soundtrack. Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. I'll have to refresh myself. I don't really remember the Bill and Ted. Is that the one with Kiss, God Gave Rock and Roll to, I think? I could be wrong, though. I'll have to look into that.
I think you're right.
Yeah. But, back then they really tried to put together a great soundtrack. There was a lot of effort into it and picking the right songs and having bands.
Romeo and Juliet. Remember Romeo and Juliet soundtrack?
That was an awesome one. Baz Luhrmann has some great soundtracks.
Christopher said From Dusk to Dawn. That's another fantastic one.
Yep. another great one. Yeah, somebody posted a soundtrack the other day, and I was like, "Oh, that was such a good one." It's just a score. Beetlejuice. You know, Danny Elfman, fantastic score. Yeah, I would buy that in a second if I saw that final.
The Batman soundtrack with Bat Dance on it.
Yeah. Not Prince's best work. I'm just gonna throw it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Danny Elfman had an incredible run of scores there. Where Pee-wee's Big Adventure, great score. I actually spun that today. Then Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, all iconic.
How about Madonna and Breathless?
Yeah, Madonna. She had the Dick Tracy.
Yeah. You got me thinking. I haven't spun that Beetlejuice in a while. I'm gonna have to go play that now.
Oh yeah, man, that's a great one. Yeah, some great soundtracks.
Or for 80s, Phil Collins, the Buster soundtrack.
I do own that.
Iconic.
Yeah, Groovy Kind of Love. How about the Rocky soundtracks? You can joke on, but they were iconic too, right? Like Rocky 2, Rocky 3, Rocky 4, even Rocky 1.
I Have a Tiger on it.
Eye of the Tiger. Yeah.
The score of Rocky 2. I mean, again, I'm more than willing to say this because in the movie at the end where he screams the old Adrian, I did it. When I listen to that part of the score, it brings a tear to my eye every single time I hear it. It's so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I get the same reaction when I watch that movie. It's just like the director did a great job.
Pump Up the Volume.
Pump Up the Volume was a great soundtrack. Yeah. Man, I haven't heard that in a long time.
What about do you remember Youngblood?
I don't.
Patrick Swayze and what's the other actor's name? Really big.
I'll have to Google it. Youngblood. I mean, it sounds familiar.
Yeah, hockey players up in Canada.
Youngblood.
What's that freaking actor's name? He was huge. Rob Lowe. Yeah.
Yep.
And that awesome track, "Stand in the Fire" on it. Just another great one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can see it now. I'm looking at the pictures. It totally. Yeah, but I don't think I've ever heard the soundtrack. I'm gonna have to listen to that one.
Yeah, that's gonna be, God. I mean, should we make it a 64 team tournament? Yeah. There's so many great ones.
Well,
that's a 16.
We could do 80s and then 90s the next week, and then pair the two against each other. You know what I mean? Like,
I think we would have to, because I can't imagine limiting it to 16 soundtracks for just even the 80s.
Yeah. So maybe we'll do 80s, and then we'll do 90s, and then we can do 70s, we can do 2000s, and then we can
do a final four.
Yeah, and put them against each other. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, next week's gonna be fun, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, most definitely. But I had fun with this topic tonight too. I'm trying to think if there's any, are there any that we've forgotten, any bands that we didn't cover that had lineup changes. I mean, we kind of skimmed over the, Iron Maiden, but they had quite a few different, you had Paul Di'Anno, and then Bruce Dickinson, and then Blaze Bayley.
Right.
Then back to Bruce Dickinson.
And you know what I was thinking too, is that there has been instances where there haven't been replacements, but there's been people that have been added to the band that have made a seismic shift. Like Clarence Clemens is the best example. Like, he joined the band and it was like, holy shit, this is like a whole new band, so I do think things like that sometimes happen.
Yeah. There's one that I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Was he on Greetings from
No, he joined with Born to Run.
Oh, did he really? He wasn't on the first two?
He wasn't on the first two. Yeah.
Oh.
That's why in that song 10th Avenue Freeze Out, he goes, they made that change of town and the big man joined the band. Yeah.
Cool.
Oh.
I think one more just worth mentioning, just because whether you like the group or not, it's like you know them and you know them by this guy. but Kool and the Gang. Like when they first came on the scene, the lead singer was a Donald Boyce or something like that. And most people could not name a single Donald Boyce song, but all of the, when JT Taylor came on, that's when Celebration, Joanna, like all the things that about the minute you think of Kool and the Gang, that was all with JT. And so I mean, he took that group to just the legendary level. Whether you hate them or love them, you like, don't play Celebration one more time. It's because JT.
Yeah.
Well, also, I don't know if there's any Wilco fans, but Jay Bennett was such a huge part of, if you're a fan of Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, Jay Bennett was right there in the studio, kind of like I was talking about Alan Wilder with Depeche Mode. He was in the studio, and he had a partnership with Jeff Tweedy, but then I think Jeff Tweedy was like, Jay Bennett's taking over too much control. Like, I mean, ultimately, Wilco was always Jeff Tweedy's band, but Jay Bennett was, I think he and Jeff Tweedy were butting heads during the sessions for Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. And so when you had A Ghost Is Born, Jay Bennett was out of the band by that point because I think he was a little too strong-headed or whatever you want to call it. But that's another one that I was thinking of.
Okay.
No, go. I was gonna say really quick. I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy that took over when Wayne Static died from Static X.
Oh yeah. I don't know his name, but
I can't remember his name for the life of me. But that was another one where Wayne being as unique as he was, it was like how exactly you're going to replace him, and this guy really kind of came in and kept it going exactly the way that Wayne did it, which was kind of impressive actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna look it up really quick, see what his name is. But yeah, just that was one that just kind of popped in my mind.
Jeff, what I was gonna say was that, like, one day we could do a video that's like the greatest breakups in terms of a woman leaving a man, and it inspired a great album. Like when Bob Dylan went through it, his breakup, and Blood on the Tracks, or with Death Cab for Cutie, and that Ghost of Beverly Drive. I'm trying to think what the name of that album is. Just a fantastic album. Like, thank you for breaking up with this dude.
Fleetwood Mac Rumors,
Yeah,
that's a great breakup album.
Yeah, too. I think that's like where some monumental breakup has inspired this fantastic piece of art.
Yeah, in the air tonight, Phil Collins.
Yeah, Phil Collins in the air tonight. Yeah.
Or Against All Odds, or whatever.
Yeah, I Still Love You by Paul Stanley. You know what I mean? I forgot what the woman that is that wrote it, but that's such a fantastic song. And it's like,
Christine 16.
Oh, Gene.
Every rose has its thorn.
Every rose has its thorn. Another great one. Yep.
Or what was the song by Ben Folds 5? Song for the Dumped.
Oh, Song for the Dumped. That's such a good one. Yeah, I love that song. Those early Ben Folds 5 albums were so good.
I know. God. Yeah. Whatever happened to Ben Folds?
I don't know. He was working on a TV show or something. But man, I remember when that first album came out, that song Underground. I was like, nothing sounded like it. I was like, this is like, if Elton John made a current album that was, you know what I mean? Like, at that point, Elton John was doing Lion King or something. I don't know, but it was just so fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Elton John got rid of his band before Rock of the Westies. The band, the Elton John band that had been with him since his classic albums like, Tumbleweed Connection, Honky Chateau, Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. Like, he totally got rid of his band for Rock of the Westies. He got like Caleb Quay and some other, I forget the other guys that were in the band, but he pink slipped the guys that had been there for so long. He got rid of Nigel Olsen. He got, I'm trying to think of the other guys he got rid of, but not necessarily for the better.
Brian says John Corabi and Motley Crue, and I love that Corabi album, and I get why people either love it or hate it. I look at it as its own entity in the Motley Crue catalog, but that is one of the best sounding albums of that era. Like the drum sound on that album, it's incredible.
Yeah, well, it's one of those kind of, you know, in terms of history, what might have been. I wonder, you know, if Vince Neil had still been in the band, you know, would they have made an album like Motley Crue, or would it have been, you know, kind of a critical, you failure? Would it have bombed? And not that the Motley Crue album didn't bomb. It's a great album. I just think it didn't sell. Compared to what a monster hit Dr. Feelgood was, I think that, you can't call the self-titled Motley Crue album anything other than, a bomb, even though it's a great album. But, if it had been Vince, and it's not fair because John Corabi is a completely different vocalist than Vince Neil. So I think they would have put out a completely different album than the self-titled Motley Crue. But, I just wonder what that would have been like. Just like, what would 5150 have been like with David Lee Roth, or what would Back in Black have been like if you had Bon Scott, or, one of those
right
mysteries we'll never know the answer to. But
yeah, what I do like about Motley Crue is that album is they didn't make a grunge album. Some people call it a grunge album, but it doesn't sound anything grungy. It doesn't sound like Motley Crue. It just sounds like rock and roll. I think that they were like, okay, well, we're just going to make a rock record. That was their thought. And I give them credit because it works. It still holds up to this day. It doesn't sound dated at all. I mean, when you listen to Dr. Feelgood, when you get to songs like She Goes Down, you know what I mean? Like, you could say, okay, well, this sounds very dated. I'm not trying to disparage it. I'm just saying that it's a product of its time. You know what I mean? Like, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true.
Yep.
All right. Any other comments we want to address before we sign off for tonight?
Let's take a look. We have a lot of comments here.
Yeah. Christopher, we already we did talk about Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks for Fleetwood Mac, so we got that one covered.
Yeah, Christopher says that Ben Folds is still touring and putting out albums. We'll have to check that out. Someone's talking about how many country singers it takes to change a light bulb. I appreciate the Corabi Crew album now, but didn't like it when it came out. I could understand that.
Yeah,
I couldn't accept the change. Yeah, it was a difficult change for people to deal with, especially depending on, how you felt about Motley Crue.
Right. Yeah.
All right, guys.
Yeah. So next
I
week,
am so looking forward to next week.
Our soundtrack battle royale. I guess we'll start with the 80s then, right?
Yeah, and we'll see how many of the boys can join. Hopefully, we can get Chris and Gary and Aaron. And yeah, that's gonna be awesome. Yeah. We should get Miss 80s on.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
I know. Looking forward to that discussion for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure Melinda, if she's in the chat. Hopefully next week's Thursday night football game sucks. I'm sure that we had a lot of people tuning into that today.
Yeah. Well, I know you guys are wondering about my fantasy team. So right now, Josh Allen has 10.82 points and Stephon Diggs has 6.20. Yeah.
Thanks.
I've never played fantasy.
I've never done it either. I have no clue how it works.
But
all I know is it pisses people off a lot. That's only.
I'm rooting for Jeff's team. Go Jeff's team.
Yay! I know. Well, I'm not
do you win money? Like if your team does well and at the end of the season, do you get some sort of cash prize?
Yeah, I mean, it's not much. It's about $220 or something like that. But I won it 2 years ago. I won my fantasy league after playing for 10 years. I finally won it. You know, but I don't know. I haven't had much success since. So
You could take that money and go buy Pulse on vinyl.
I know.
Yeah. Let's get Jeff's team to win. Come on.
Yeah,
Jeff.
come on, everybody. Let's pull together and we can make it happen. All right. Well, thanks everybody who joined in tonight. I appreciate it. Unfortunately, we had to compete with Michael Pilmer and the NFL, but that's all right.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a blast next week doing our battle royale. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
So,
Looking forward to it.
yeah. All right. Well, fellas, it's been real.
All right, guys. Take care.